Hello, and welcome to another episode of Executive Wellness Unplugged. I am your host, Lisa Kelly. So I hope you've been finding our new Executive Wellness Unplugged podcast series both informative and inspirational. And be sure to reach out with any topics or maybe guest recommendations for this podcast. And you can reach us at info@workplacewellnesscoe.com or certainly via our contact page on our website at workplacewellnesscoe.com. So in today's episode, I am joined by Murray Harber, and he is the Executive Director of the Mississippi Business Group on Health. And he's a passionate leader in healthcare and employer health and well-being and consults with organizations worldwide. Now, Murray is a writer, speech coach, and investor dedicated to creating innovative solutions that improve health, employee health, and reduce business costs. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Human Performance and Sports Studies from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And his career boasts experience with major universities, healthcare systems, and corporations. And he's actually worked with institutions like the University of Minnesota, Hennepin, I say that correctly, Hennepin County, Park Nicollet Health Services, and Ford Motor Company. And he's also developed award-winning health and wellness programs, including those at Southern Farm Bureau Life Insurance and the Mississippi State Employee Wellness Program. And of particular note, I find it really interesting that he began his career as a strength and speed coach at Vanderbilt University and has coached many SEC and NCAA champions and several Olympic athletes. Now, I want to start right there. I'd love to have you share just a little, that was a mouthful there. I mean, I have a whole bunch of questions, of course, but I really want to just learn more about that and how that was a springboard into where you are today.
Sure. First, thanks for having me on, and I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity here. I studied exercise physiology at the University of Tennessee, where I was a student strength coach, and my first jobs were strength and conditioning coach at Vanderbilt University, where trained athletes in all sports and trained athletes at the University of Tennessee. So that SEC experience was good. That led me to train some Olympic athletes in women's basketball and track and field. I then transitioned that later on in Minnesota to train a couple Olympic skiers for 2002 in Salt Lake City. So as an exercise physiologist, that was my passion. And then when I moved to Minnesota is where I actually got into health promotion, working for a health system, Park Nicollet Health Services, and we're technically Park Nicollet Health Source, and where I learned really health promotion, well-being, and I brought a sports medicine approach to health promotion.
Really? Oh, that's fascinating. It's interesting because a number of people I've interviewed got their foundation and their roots, I guess, in, exercise physiology or doing something of that in their first area of study. So that's always really interesting. So thanks for being with me today. And I always like to kick off our conversations really and hopefully inspire maybe leaders and others who are listening around self-care practices that you may engage in every day or every week. And, in keeping with that, what are maybe some non-negotiables that you commit to each day? And as a follow-up to that, then, so a sort of three-part question. How, is your energy and performance impacted when you don't attend to your self-care, you neglect it?
Sure. It's interesting. I always took health kind of seriously, but not as serious as I should have growing up because we're always 10 foot tall and bulletproof growing up. It's going to affect us sometime later in life. And so basically, when I worked for Park Nicollet Health Source, we actually authored books as well. And one of our leader, and which I'll talk about a little bit later on, authored a self-care book. So some of the early interventions that we did in our employee health and well-being programs was to package our self-care book to give to all employees to take home to engage the family to have a source to understand about self-care.
Right.
So my view of self-care grew at that moment from your typical eating right, moving, sleep to, okay, we need to know more about our family history. We need to know more about our own health risks that are there, and then looking at, how, our self-awareness, which I think a lot of times people have lost in our societies, that self-awareness of our own health. Two, of course, as an exercise physiologist, I'm a pretty active person. I'm like everybody else, it ebb and flows on the frequency, intensity, and time that we do those things. And what parts of the country, dictate that to me, living in both the North and Minnesota as well as the Southeast. But I'm real avid about being active every day and making sure that we warm up and then warm down. That was something when I was a coach to make sure people did. So that's my mainstay, and I think it's a mainstay for everyone. That's a non-negotiable, is
Right.
being physically active every day, moving your body, because we're meant to move, not to sit as much
Yeah.
as well.
Is there
I
one particular thing that you like to do every day consistently, or do you do a variety of things to stay active?
I have a ongoing back issue, so I have to do a certain amount of core every day. But living in New Orleans at the moment. I always enjoy walking and biking. So
Nice.
biking is kind of my mainstay that I
Yeah.
do all the time. And then if I get to the gym, I'll lift and play some sports like racquetball and tennis and golf. I like to recreate as well. But definitely, I think it's the walking, biking, and core activities for sure.
When you talk about a non-negotiable, before we go further, when I was writing my book, several years ago, a few years ago, I sitting too much, right? I did get a standing desk eventually, but sitting too much, working in my business and then writing at night or what have you. I had a sort of ongoing back issue, maybe like yourself, right? And it just got really chronic, and I thought, oh gracious, I'm in the middle of writing a book. I can't be sick, right? So what became a non-negotiable for me, and I talk about it at the end of my book, is every night my dog and I literally would get on the floor and we do about four or five core yoga poses, and the cat cow, the downward dog, upward dog, and I just noticed like little by little, it was interesting too because we took up kayaking that summer, and I really had an incentive to get healthy, right? And my back gets strong. But every night doing that little bit along with daily movement, just progressively over day, I kind of started seeing a real improvement. And so I would suspect maybe the same for you, whether it's core or stretching or doing things that support your back. If you don't do it on a certain day, do you really feel the impact of that?
Uh, yes, if I don't warm up my body in the morning and warm down properly, if I forget to do it, several days in a row, it's not going to
Yeah.
do it off one day, but I start feeling the effects of that.
Yeah.
And I'm real big on making sure people get up and dynamically move their bodies just to loosen up. Then
Yeah.
at night is when you calm the body down so it
Right.
can recover.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
So, yeah, go
Some of
ahead.
the other, some of the court non-negotiables, I think, are I'm a big fan. I grew up gardening, and my mother and aunts taught me how to cook. So
Yeah,
although I grew up in the South, I learned how to cook all the bad stuff and cook everything
of
to
course.
death. But as I was influenced through my career of being around a bunch of chefs, is I learned really how to make healthy meals and serve them in the right portions. And so I'm a very adamant about eating fresh, whole, local food, making
Nice.
food as much as possible. And it saves time and money, no matter if people say it's more expensive, it's not.
It's not.
When you start adding things up, and I grew a passion for it. So that's a good stress management for me, is chopping vegetables and preparing food for others, and we entertain, which is nice. And so there's a lot of stress management with that. So I call it feeding and fueling the body.
What would you say to a leader, whether there's a female or male leader who's just really, really busy? They're in the office from 7 till 7 at night or whatever. What would you say to them in terms of making time to really fuel the body and feed the body?
I think it's a perceived lack of time because they make time to do other things that they're doing. I know they're busy, but it really, if you plan properly and with food delivery today, I mean, you can get stuff delivered to you. So that cuts out a lot of the grocery shopping is one of those time wasters people talk about, but you can get it delivered. Prepping some food ahead of time, like, grilling meats, once a week and then having them, and just having things prepared
Yeah.
really saves time. So I think you can counteract that
Yeah.
argument a lot of times by just planning and using resources that you have.
Yeah. Good. You were going to say one more non-negotiable, I think you were mentioning or about to mention.
Sleep. I think
Sleep.
sleep is a thing over time. Back when I coached, what people tend to forget is when we sleep, that's when the body recovers and heals itself. And you've got to, even when we trained athletes, you did the training stimulus, but if you didn't hydrate and feed them and then get the right sleep, your training effect didn't happen. So you've got to do both the training and those other recovery items. And I think that's a non-negotiable. I went for a long time just getting 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and I started feeling sluggish. And then I started working with shift workers at the Ford plant, and I started doing sleep programs and teaching people. So, and it's ebb and flows over the years. But I mean, the last 10 years, I've really focused on getting my sleep pattern down, making sure my environment is preparing myself to sleep and minimize distractions during the night so you can get quality sleep. So your
See my
body
dev-
can recover.
Yeah, and getting off those devices. I'm still challenged by that sometimes, it's just so tempting to want to check in on your device, especially if you work late into the
Well,
night.
I was listening to your podcast with the cardiologist, and that's when I do some deep breathing and meditation is at night, right? So that's what, instead of being on the phone, I kind of do some mindfulness and meditation and stretching without any screen time, and that prepares my body. So I've tried to replace that.
Absolutely. Good.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you listened to that episode. So, you know, that this kind of leads into the next question then. Why really, and I think we've touched on it already, but let's just expand on it. Why should leaders make self-care a priority for themselves and of course for their employees in today's highly dynamic climate? Because, it could always be argued that we've always been in busy work environments, but it just seems like post-pandemic, we're trying to get our foot in again. And it just everyone's like, oh, I'm so busy, I'm crazy busy. Yeah, I don't have time for self-care. I mean, what would you say to that, to leaders?
I would say, self-care, when we promote health and well-being programs to employers, we're like, a healthy employee is a productive employee.
Mhm.
And that goes for every employee, whether it's the senior leadership,
Mhm.
the middle management, or the employees with the boots on the ground. It goes for everybody. And by practicing self-care as a leader, you're going to be healthier. You're going to be able to manage these stressors. When you think about when people say I don't have time, that's a response to stress,
Yes.
right? Their response is to say, I can't, I can't, I can't. And it's like, well, okay, let's take time, to really reflect on why that is. And if you can focus on your own self-care, you will be a healthier leader, you'll be a healthier employer, and you'll be demonstrating what you want the other employees to do.
Yeah, I love that. And a couple questions come to mind. One, how do you think we're doing as organizations in that regard, in terms of leaders walking the talk, or as I say in my book, demonstrating visible permission, which means employees see them taking care of themselves, maybe going to the caf to get a healthy salad, or walking around the building as opposed to this taking the elevator, or just putting on their sneakers and, having employees maybe see them go out for a walk or a jog at lunch hour. I mean, how do you think we're doing now in our organizations with regard to self-care? Because, we're in sort of tumultuous times now coming out of a pandemic, right?
I think we're doing better over my career. If I were to just take my career as a timeline, I think we're doing better because I think there's younger people, at least our age, that are now leaders of the organization that grew up around health and wellness and
Right.
well-being and fitness to where I think they adopt it more often and they've adopted lifestyle habits. Now, we still have a long way to go. Not all leaders are doing that as well. And the question comes into play is how are they presenting it to the employees out there, right? I've noticed that, I've worked with some CEOs where they like to play tennis. So that's their physical activity, or some like to play golf. That's their activity. And people don't necessarily see them doing those things.
Yeah.
But so I do believe in that they need to demonstrate in the workplace and communicate those areas of self-care. And
Right.
that includes promoting the resources and benefits that they offer to create a
Yeah.
healthy
Yeah.
culture.
Maybe like showing up at wellness events or doing the ribbon cutting or actively
Showing up. If they
participating.
just show up and people see that person shows up, I've a lot of one of my shticks throughout my career is do a farmer's market at a workplace. So I bring farmers to the
Oh,
workplace.
nice.
And when you have the CEO or executives come down there and their spouses come in and everybody sees them, that makes a huge difference to feel
Absolutely.
accepted in doing those things.
Or,
So I think
one thing, yeah, I was going to say one thing too, during the pandemic, one of my graduates of our programs did interviews. They had a wellness day and they interviewed, like, she's responsible for a lot of municipalities. And so they interviewed mayors and that. And those videos were so powerful because the videos not only had them present and talk about showing up for the wellness day, They also, maybe because of this time, the times, in the pandemic, but they were very vulnerable about their own well-being and what they were going through. And there's so much to be said for a leader showing and exhibiting that vulnerability, because then again, it sets the stage for others employees to do the same, right?
Yeah. And, in Mississippi, we would hold at the state capitol. This is with the state employee wellness program that includes all state agencies, board and commissions, and you're looking about 100 different entities as well as the public school districts, but this is mostly downtown. But we would do Shape Up at the Capitol and farmers state employee day at the farmers market. Well, I would get the head of the Senate, the head of the House. I'd get the governor, lieutenant governor to make sure that they showed up at those events. And that meant a lot to where they felt like, hey, it's okay for me to be there. It's, oh, you're doing this too. And I would get them to say a few words on the importance of health, and well-being at that. And it just meant a lot to the employees to see that.
Well, I love that. And I don't know if you've read the book Good Energy by Dr. Casey Means. It's going to change the world. It's just really awesome. But she talks about like when the Surgeon General came out and said smoking is bad for us, smoking cessation really picked up. So
Yep.
you're right. Like when we have our heads of state who people hopefully look up to, then, along with our CEOs and our C-suite, that can make a real difference. And I think we potentially have more room, and that we can grow in that area, right? Just lastly, is there any particular leader that you work with stand out in your mind, and
You
why
know,
in terms
I've
of
had several. I'll mention if that's okay.
yeah.
One, I'll take Dr. Paul Terry, who wrote the self-care book. He was a PhD, but he's an international leader, and he was a longtime led HERO, the Health Enhancement Research Organization, and a researcher. And really, his modeling behavior, even today, when I look on social media, he's doing his windsurfing and sailboating, and everything on the boat. So he's being active and he's demonstrating it in his pictures with his family still to this day.
And who is this again? Just for our
Dr.
listeners.
Paul Terry,
Dr.
he's in
Paul Terry.
Minneapolis.
Yeah.
He was the head of HERO, Health Enhancement
Oh
Research.
yes, okay.
But he also was our leader at Park Nicollet Health Source in the Institute for Research, where that was housed. And then I'll talk about Billy Sims. He was the senior VP of HR and Policy Services at Southern Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company in Jackson, Mississippi. The fattest state in the country, most unhealthiest state, and they were a life insurance company. And you know, uh, we had got to know each other because I just moved there from Minnesota, and he was looking to do more in the health and wellness because his CEO said, if these rising healthcare costs you don't do something about it, then I'm going to find a new HR person. So
Okay. Oh wow.
Billy and I and some of his consultants, we drafted, and I used the hero scorecard as a best practice to say, here's what you need to do. Here's the game plan. Right? And we built it over a 10-year period. And he not only supported it, but promoted it, got the executive leadership to talk about it. And everything we put in place, we did it over time of creating a wellness program. And he would talk about it and actually participate in activities till we put an on-site clinic in place with performance-based disease management in there, and he and his wife would come down and participate and be visible and be part of the promotional area. So although he was active himself, he didn't realize how much people seeing him be active and participate in the healthcare benefits made a difference. And it made all the difference where in 10 years we built a program that they won a C. Everett Koop Award at one of the Hero conferences as one of the
Nice.
healthiest workplaces. So he's a perfect example of those activities right there.
So, I think it goes without saying then, and maybe you can just, end off on what we're talking about here before we move on is, yeah, I mean, the leadership plays such a significant role and sets sound foundation, a solid foundation for the organizations or health. And let's not forget, right? I mean, it's not just about employee well-being. The health and wellness of our leadership, of our employees, it's everything in terms of predicting the growth, the success, and sustainability of our organizations.
Yeah, one of my key strategies is to integrate things throughout the organization.
Mm.
And when leaders realize that they're used to purchasing things in silos, and that's how they look at it as an expense. And they're like, well, we have an insurance program, we do this, we built a walking path. Well, if you don't program the walking path and you don't engage people into good ways and incent them to use the health plan well and do things, it's not going to work as well.
Hmm.
So I think one of my sales pitches to key leaders is think about the law where you could be, and you're not doing the best practices. So you're down here. You're leaving this much on the table from time, talents, and treasures, which is money and energy and time, right? And you're leaving so much capacity on the table. And do you really want to do that? What if you could be more efficient as an organization, and that takes the management, leadership, and management to be more efficient and effective, as well as the employees.
Oh, I love that. And another question, I know we never really talked about it, but for the benefit of our graduates and upcoming graduates of our executive wellness, our certified executive wellness coaching course, we have a new one starting now this fall. What's a piece of advice you might give to an executive wellness coach in terms of how they might begin to support, I know, a new leader, whether it's a CEO or someone on the senior leadership team, or maybe a manager or director? What would be a piece of advice you might give them as an executive coach?
I try to listen to them and find out what their real issues are versus their perceived issues, and
Mm,
then break down those barriers and tell them and really show them how they could be more effective as a leader, using the strategies that you promote in your courses.
yeah.
But also, how do you've got to relate to the person as a person, right?
Mm,
First and foremost, right? And I always go after, think about their kids,
yeah.
when people never argue about paying for anything with their children. So I ask them, what do your kids think? Right? And what about this? And how does this affect your children and what they're doing and your spouse, especially executives? You've that work-life spillover is very key. So I really try to reach out to them from a personal standpoint, as well as I reach out to them like, how does your team respond to you? Is it, do you do things from more of a fear or more of a positive, approach? And I think we've seen a shift over the past 20 years of going from the beat them with the stick to
Carrot
beat
with stick. Yeah.
beat them with a carrot and then maybe offer a carrot. We're
Yeah.
transitioning into that mode of thing. But I think it's, to me, it's if you can figure out how to make things efficient for them and how do you integrate it properly where it crosses over
Yeah.
is the key element. At least that's part of my success
Yeah.
over the years is I've integrated things from doing a wellness piece and a health and safety talk at a manufacturing plant to,
Right.
how do I mix the work comp and the health benefits together by putting a rehab center in and a wellness center together. You can't just think about how you purchase it, but how does it all integrate together?
Integrate. Yeah. And I
Communication
know.
is key.
Yeah, I love that. And if anything before we move on that you want to comment in terms of quick wellness wins. I worked with a CEO as a coach there during the pandemic at a hospital, and he was all about, I need some quick wellness wins for me and my team, and so anything, like
Wellness what?
some quick wellness wins. So what like
Wins.
quick
Good.
wellness wins, right? So something that can motivate and inspire them to then work on maybe the more challenging, bigger parts of their wellness goals, right?
I think anybody, when you say you have a staff meeting, why can't, and I loved your cardiologist starting off a meeting with 1 minute of mindfulness meditation. I love that, right?
Yeah.
And I use a quick stretch break or a breathing break. One of my favorite books I've read in the past 5 years is Breathe, which is teaching you how to do certain nasal breathing to either calm you down or excite you.
Mhm.
Uh, how do you keep, it's like I always had a fresh fruit bowl around for my thing. So I'm gonna have a meeting, I have a fresh fruit bowl and let people, and I'll be the first one or get the leader to be the first one to eat an apple. So demonstrating some simple wellness wins, making it easy where it doesn't take a lot of time, but
Yeah.
put things in the environment for them to do things I think are easy wellness wins.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And the CEO I spoke of, he shared with me like doing gratitude practices, but then he said he would add on that he would not only focus on three things he's grateful for, but what role did he play? And he said when he started doing that, that just made all the difference. So sometimes just tweaking or amplifying the little things that we've done that just make it all the more meaningful and impactful, right?
Right?
Yeah. So just on the converse then, from your experience or what you've seen of other organizations, what are some potential outcomes or impacts on employee and organizational wellness and performance when leadership, does not promote or prioritize or fully support employee well-being?
Right. Lisa, I love that question. Okay. It's taking the approach of, okay, what's the negative effects from not
The
doing something?
downside, yeah.
Right. And to me is I look at employee health and well-being is related to turnover, So if you're not doing as much, you're going to get more turnover. And we know that can be anywhere from 0.5 to 2 times the cost of that employee. I think you look at the individual and team productivity, there's a drain to it based on presenteeism, which is how present someone is at work when they're at work. Because
Mhm.
we're all dealing with stuff no matter what. No one's perfect. So how much we're dealing with external things such as elder care or parenting and internal things such as egos and attitudes at the workplace, interpersonal issues play a role. So, I just think you see a drain on presenteeism and productivity. I think definitely with absence, when you don't do things, your absenteeism will be higher, no matter how you measure that, or we call it time away from work
Mhm.
now. Um, and I think you look at morale. Uh, when you have a workforce that's not supportive of health and well-being, research shows that, I mean, the morale kind of goes down because you might be in an environment where it's, again, where it's beating them with the stick, rushing them, do things and everything else. And so I think those are some of the drains and the things you don't see. I can always talk about increased health cost and workers' comp costs and all that, but I think those others are kind of the key areas that a lot of leaders don't look at because they come from the financial world, if it's not tangible right away, they don't take it seriously. But if you start looking at the total capacity, like I mentioned earlier, these things are a drain on their total capacity of what they could be doing. And if you've worked for a public company, that's shareholder value in the long run, profitability for other sets of groups.
Yeah, and I just wrote about this in an article. Something else that we sometimes, and I'm really encourage our coaches to think about this when they're working with leaders and impress upon them, and in our well-being programs as wellness leaders, that we have to be on our A game every day in work sites. I mean, we're moving at warp speed now, right now in organizations, right? We don't have time to craft take 5 years to come up with a new iPhone, let's just say, right? We have to be on our game, and creativity and ingenuity, being fresh of mind, which again, sleep and eating healthy and everything else comes into big play, right? So that's one thing. But just another part of a question here, maybe for us to think about and talk about is, the race for talent, right? And the younger generations now are, from what I hear, are going to organizations, and one of the first few questions they're asking is, how are you going to care for my well-being?
Mhm.
How are you putting my well-being, as important as the work that I'm doing, right? Are you seeing any of that? Are you hearing
Oh,
something
we see
about
a lot of that. And I think, with, again, these newer leaders that are kind of our age now, right? We're one side.
young people?
The traditionalists are moving out, right? And now you've got these younger generations that make up 40% of the workforce, if
Yeah.
not more. And they are expecting certain things. They want work flexibility. They want to make sure you have some great health insurance along with a good wellness well-being program overall. And then what resources, because they've read all this stuff about Google providing things,
Yeah.
and other companies providing, so they want the same things. And coming out of the pandemic, we've seen it, really, I think, accelerate. So I think senior leaders have to think different
Yeah.
about their human capital, of how they attract and retain employees, and be able to promote those areas into their job postings, and to, when they onboard, highlight those areas right away of how important that a climate and culture of health and safety and well-being is important for the companies, and put it out front and center, not just focusing on here's your benefits, here's the time attendance, here's this, and which HR people can do a lot. And I
Mm.
think there's a lot of growth that can still happen with the HR teams on how they bring people in and onboard them and continually to support them along the way around all these benefits, no matter if it's the younger generation, but I mean, our generation as
Yeah.
well.
Well, that's the other thing too, because as leaders and our wellness leaders, we have, some cases, maybe 5 generations at a work site. So we need to be mindful of, supporting the younger generations and the older generations, or those that are coming back to work part-time. I mean, we need to, yeah, take care of them all. I love that. And,
And not everybody's on their phone for programming. Everything's gone very app friendly and computer friendly, and not everybody, reaches. I work with a company down it's a family company that has 12 companies in Belize, and we're working on that now. Not everyone's on their phone. They
yeah,
use WhatsApp as a primary communication, but they've got a farm that the people on the farm, they don't really use their phones. So
right. So how do
how
we
do we
reach
do
them?
things for them, right, that have to be more in person, or get the leader there to offer some things. We have to give options. And I think about solutions for, your certified, executive wellness coaches is you got to do multiple channels and multiple, how do you take this one action you're wanting, but you've got to still apply it to each generation. And I think that's something that's very important.
Yeah, I love that. And just something as well, like my sister works in a government department here in Canada, and they were, like a lot of people during the coming out of the pandemic, able to work from home 3 days a week. Now they're saying they got to come back 5 days a week. So, and we're seeing more and more of this, and employees are getting stressed or getting sick about this because they've finally got a little bit of work-life balance, and by all accounts are actually being more productive. My sister said she's far more productive than, having to spend 2 hours a day commuting, right? And using that time for productivity. Um,
So
yeah,
if I
what do you,
may,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I have a story on that. So
Okay, I'd love to hear
a lot
that.
of research that goes back and forth on that. And it depends on your job, particular position. And if you're in a team, and we're finding that especially upperly mobile females feel left out of moving up, right, with things. So there's the research is, I mean, getting people to work in the workplace that's used to is really a key thing. Having some flexibility to work from home is a key thing. So I was speaking at a conference 2 years ago, right, coming out of the pandemic, and I was given the research on productivity for remote workers. And this one lady says, I'm productive at home better than I am at the workplace. I said, well, tell me why. She goes, well, I can do my leaves when I'm at home. I'm like, well, hold on. Is that on your morning 15-minute break or afternoon 15-minute break or your 30-minute paid lunch? Right. So I think there's been a blending of personal productivity and your professional workplace productivity.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think there's many stories like that out there. And
Uh,
I think there's certain places that you can work from home,
yeah,
but people feel left out. The research I'm seeing now, people feel left out from the team. You can Zoom all day long, but there's
yeah.
something about that social interaction in the workplace. So people have to find a blend. Employers and leaders have to find a blend
Mhm.
of new remote work
Yeah, I think
environment.
that's the answer is, work with what works for the organization and maybe make it a team, function where they can have that latitude, right? To maybe depending on what's best for the team, right? But I know as a wellness person from people I've talked with, like let's just say out of an 8 hour day, I would suspect you get 4 to 5 hours maybe of key productivity, right? Especially that wanes as the afternoon. So as a wellness person, and I know myself working from home, I get way more done than I do if I'm out, in a corporate setting. And I just have that more creative space, right? Quietness, because I know working in open office cubicles never worked for me. So I think, it really depends on meeting people where they are as a team individually as much as you can. And maybe, as you said, having that blend and that flexibility. So maybe 1 or maybe 2 days a week, they can work from home, right? And there's that sort of openness to doing that, right?
I think it's each company and organization is different,
Mm.
right? It's like I use there's examples all the time of, bricklayers can't work from home.
Yeah,
Heart surgeons can't work from home,
yeah,
right? It depends on the job situation
yeah, it does.
that's there
Yeah,
with
yeah,
things.
yeah. Good, good. Um, okay, so a few years back, you created the cheat sheet for the C-suite. 6 questions, every C-suite should ask themselves to gain more significant impact on their human capital and the organization's financial success. If you like, I can actually bring up that cheat sheet and
Oh, that's great.
yeah, bring it up on the screen. Let
So a
me.
couple of years ago, a friend of mine, Chase Sterling, who runs the Wellbeing Think Tank out on the West Coast, said, "Murray, I need you to do something on engagement and how the wellness coordinators that I work with, how they can engage the C-suite to do more to take it seriously." So,
Right.
I've been thinking about this a little bit with this coming out of the pandemic, and I said, let's create this cheat sheet for this C-suite, and and so what these are some areas of opportunity that I think that in internal team, whether it's an HR person or say a CEO, CFO or a CHRO or whoever's there, that they can ask questions of themselves, and one of the first ones, is your program linked into the vision? Is employee health and well-being, health, safety, and well-being part of your whole vision
Yeah.
that's out there? I just think that's a key area. And linking it in there, it really represents when people see that it's there, it's important.
Mhm.
I worked with a company that was really sales focused and they were just talking about customer, customer, customer. But, and I said, well, there's always a fine line between your sales function and your operation function,
Mhm.
right? And, you can't have one without the other. The salespeople will always say, well, without us, we won't exist. And I would say, well, without operations, they can't, whatever you sell, you can't pull it off and
Right.
meet customer satisfaction. So you kind of make sure that it's linked in there for all aspects that's there overall. The other thing I would think about as we look at this is the workplace settings. I
Mhm.
think with today's remote, I do a lot of work with the CDC and this national group too, and we're doing ways to promote physical activity for this new remote work environment. But remember, so if you're not very few groups are just centralized now. They
Mhm.
have remote offices, they have people working from home, working from the community, and other things. So, what are you doing to provide resources? Like you mentioned, your sit stand desk,
Yeah.
right? When people are working from home, are you providing from your ergonomics program a
Mhm.
sit stand desk for the persons and teach them how to use it?
Yeah.
And that's a key thing is the behaviors of that. And I'll mention this is standing all day long has the same risk as
It
sitting all day.
does.
So you
Absolutely.
have to, you're supposed to do alternate in the morning, a little bit, take time at lunch, then alternate again, in the afternoon, uh, uh, those things. So I think looking at those environments, what are you providing? And you got to look at benefit equity on those things sometimes
Yeah.
on those locations. So your physical environment, I think in workplace settings, very important to think about how you're providing the different resources for your employees to be equitable overall.
Right.
The other one is DEI and benefits. I do believe with the onset of, diversity, equity, inclusion, uh, I think we're missing the boat on what does that mean in the employee health and benefits world? It's
Mm.
more than just, promoting disparities and things, but it's like, how are you designing your benefits?
Yes.
Right now in the world of benefits, the big argument is the GLP-1s and
Yes.
obesity resources, right? Everything from lifestyle factors to maybe some certain weight management programs that offer things to pharmaceuticals to bariatric surgery, right? And knowing, and do you have sliding scales based on the different employee compensation model, right? And so I think when you look at it, how do you apply the diversity, equity, inclusion in your benefits that you're offering to meet people where they are as not to be burdensome, but to be fair and equitable?
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. Can I just pivot for a second and just talk about the
Sure.
GLP ones and what your thoughts are? And I know we all have biases, and as a wellness person, of course, I have some of my own thoughts, right? What are you seeing in the US particularly? Are companies starting to approve, partial or full subsidy of these medications, these injections?
There
And
are some actually that are doing some really good programs. What I'm seeing, those that are most successful are those that they're the bigger companies that have an on-site clinic and they're working through their on-site clinic to get some
okay.
preferential pricing and to do a program like a Centers of Excellence to
Hmm.
make sure that it's managed. Just offering it as itself isn't really, I don't think, beneficial because there's a lot of variation that can occur.
Right.
But I think if you have it packaged with a good comprehensive program, and there's some different vendors coming that have been out there now for a while that are looking at the comprehensive approach to make sure people are guided through these
Yeah.
stages
And
to
maybe
make
that it's just not the
it
first point of, reference or first
effective.
option that, maybe personally, I'd like to see that other areas have been exhausted, that they worked with a health coach or what have you. And then maybe, or certainly if they're doing that, work in conjunction with maybe a health coach. Because, we know things like there's a lot of muscle mass that is lost in that. So, are they going to the gym or doing things to maintain or strengthen their muscles, right?
Right. I think you've got to work up the stages, and that's where I think it's a clinical intervention.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure you have good relationships with if you don't have an on-site clinic, if you have certain providers that are centers of excellence, make sure that you contract with those groups. That's what we're seeing from a fiduciary responsibility side of things, Lisa,
Yeah.
is now plan managers are personally responsible. And there's several lawsuits out there now, the Johnson & Johnson's the most prevalent one right now, where a plan member suing the company and its managers because are not managing the program properly. And I think it's becoming a heightened awareness. So you hopefully will see more health benefits programs expand in their breadth of programs and resources and communicate those to the plan members, aka the employees and their family members that are there.
Yeah.
That'll do that.
Yeah, yeah, nice. And then last year, the last one, the fiduciary and waste. Is there anything you'd like to comment on that?
On which one?
The
Oh,
fidu-
all the waste. I
yeah.
think, that's the whole, I think, again, when this whole fiduciary responsibility in health plans, right?
Mm,
How much out there are they wasting? We're finding that 20 to 30% of an employer's premium or cost is waste and unnecessary.
mm,
So now, you've got good, Doug DuBose, down in Alabama. He's a senior HR for a group down there, and he was anyway, been speaking all over on this, and he actually took the approach where, no, I'm writing the PBM contract. No, I'm writing this contract. They will do what I want to do. I don't have to do what they say they're going to do. And so he's taken a supply chain approach to healthcare, and he's been able to save bukus of money in both his health plan as well as workers' comp by integrating those and managing that himself. I think that's important. It's just like if you were managing waste within other things from copy cost or,
mm,
travel cost and other things that are there. So I think that's very important.
mm. Interesting. And then, of course, the overall, the value of investment, right? I talk a lot about in my book about the value of the workplace wellness proposition or the value of employee well-being proposition. And sometimes we say it, it's words on a wall. We don't mean it or integrate it fully or do as good a job as we could. It's just, what would you say about that in terms of value and investments? Any parting words that you'd like to share?
Yeah, my friend Jessica Grossmeyer really turned me on to this terminology years ago, and she's an international recognized health and well-being person, and
Mm,
uh, and she introduced it to me as like, Murray, we got to start moving away from ROI, right? And that in returns to, are we looking at what we're putting into these programs, whether it's health insurance, workers' comp, in the HR department, health and safety department, all these things as we have all these investments. So are we getting the intended outcome from these investments that we want?
mhm,
And the models that they've pieced together are showing that we haven't been, right?
mm,
Not getting the best value out of it. And it goes back to that capacity discussion I talked about earlier. What if we were 100% effective in everything that we do? And if you look at it, we're probably at about 50%. So that's a lot of margin that we're leaving on the table that we can do if we do things smarter
mhm,
and really and key executives look at it that way. And sometimes it's hard to change a CFO's mind on how
mm,
they look at cost,
mhm,
but if you can really show them some things and make good inferences and show them studies and show up really the best examples of other companies doing it the right way. And that's where with my business group on health, we show them through our awards program, which are based off of best practices from the Hero Scorecard
right.
to do things. And it's interesting, we've grown the number of employers, public and private, doing effective or best practices for health and well-being programs by doing the awards program. So now they have to meet these set of standards
Yeah.
that are out there. And I find it becomes, they get jealous. People that compete against it, they get jealous, whether it's an auto dealer or insurance companies or manufacturing. And they're like, no, we want to be the best. We want to, and all of a sudden that's a great way to drive executives to doing the right things.
I never really thought about in that terms or context before of, the chicken or egg, right? The having those programs, those contests, raising the bar is like I know there's a number of accrediting bodies now in Canada and US and globally that have said, okay, well-being you have to demonstrate the strength of that you have a well-being program and the strength and the outcomes of it, right? So yeah, I think that's interesting that awards can have that impact, right, on well-being programs. And a last question then we'll probably end off on, and then I'll let you have a final word as well. What about the role of the chief well-being officer? So let's just say a wellness manager or a director went to their CE suite or CEO and said, I would like to craft and have approval for a chief well-being role. Do you think there is merit and a lot of high value for organizations to instigate a role of a chief well-being officer? And have you seen of some organizations and what's the outcome been of such?
Yes, I've actually seen that in the past 20 years, seen it start to really, where there's several groups that have them now. The scope and scale of what that position is a little different in each organization. I do believe there's a key role, and I think it should be an integrator. When you look at chief other officers and everything else, whether it's a chief health officer, health is one thing. Well-being to me looks at the quality of life and the community engagement and all these other aspects. I think it's important to that the chief well-being officer can be the integrator that
Yeah.
helps integrate all these areas of a business toward more outcomes and get to improve that capacity, working at that capacity that we keep talking about. But it's all about how it's set up. The
Yeah.
problem is in our industry, and you know this, Lisa, that wellness has gotten a bad rap over years because
Mm,
bad players have promoted this, and it's not effective, which is why I always go back to best practices like the Health Enhancement Research Organization and their best practice scorecard. And they're to me the leader. If we can follow a standard definition of what that is, and
yeah.
I like the Gallup group as well for
Yeah.
their what Gallup well-being is. So those two fit together. And if you can get people to look at that way, that's where a chief well-being officer can be a very effective person in there. We're seeing healthcare systems do chief well-being officer for the physicians. They're
Oh,
looking
yes, I have
health and
seen it.
well-being.
Yeah, and I know some organizations and healthcare systems now have a specific well-being program just for their physicians, recognizing, there's so much burnout and suicide rates and suicide ideology, sadly, with physicians, probably more so than ever before, which is quite sad to hear.
And my
Um,
friends at Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and a lot of the bigger ones are leading the charge in that, and I think it's a wonderful thing.
yeah, I know. Well, Murray, this has been really insightful and so informative. And I love that, you have the depth of knowledge to speak to things that, can probably be food for thought for our C-suite and our CEOs and our senior leadership teams. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, whether it's, specifically speaking to, maybe I'll have you speak some final parting words to, our leadership teams. What might you say to them?
One of the reasons why I don't train athletes anymore, my father was an executive for a company that made mufflers and shock absorbers. I grew up in 8 states and 3 countries before I was 18.
Mm,
I lost my father at 56 years. He was 56. My mom was 59.
mm,
Right. And that's when I accelerated my passion for helping employers to do it the right way.
yeah.
Right. And if there's anything, I think if you're wellness coaches, your certified wellness executive coaches, or any C-suite person is go look at your personal story and say, do I want my kids to have someone because I don't want to have a kid of an executive today, like I did, lose their father or mother
Mm,
at 56 years old, right? In the
right.
program, right? And I think that is something I think is very important is have that passion, find that personal story that's there.
Mhm.
And I think executives just need to think different. And my go-to beside the cheat sheet is to say, you know what, you can do better. You can do more. Listen to those around you, look at those in your peer group and what they're doing and how they're doing it and learn from them. I know you might be competitive, but sometimes I've seen executives in the same industry who compete against each other get to be friends and spouses become friends and they trickle down and become in both organizations grow and get better overall.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of something, and we've probably all heard it, but I'll just bring it to the forefront again, right? Like, never, I don't think has it ever been said on an epitaph, maybe a few that, he was a wonderful CEO, or in their final words, their eulogy at their funeral, right? So it's the proverbial, like, think about how you want your life defined,
Mhm.
right? In the final analysis, right?
Exactly. You remind me of, if I can say one quick
Yeah,
story.
absolutely.
This has nothing to do with health, but this has to do in the state of Mississippi. We finally changed the flag a few years ago. And the way it was going to it wasn't going to happen. But we finally went to the legislators and we said, how do you want your kids to remember you?
Mm,
And that shifted it from like 60% saying no to only 20% say no. And
wow.
so, what legacy are you going to leave? Do you
Yeah.
want to seen as that executive that was just the hardcore beat them with the stick, or you get the person that, hey, they created an organization and a culture that allowed us to thrive, and I loved my career there, and they offered these things that allowed us to do things, and I will always remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much, Marie. This has been just so informative. And I love that we could really speak, have a direct line of communication to our leadership because I haven't up till now really had a guest presenter with the depth of knowledge or experience or insights and passion to speak, along the lines of how we've been talking here today. So I'm sure you've given our listeners a lot to think about, especially our leaders, and hopefully to put into practice. And so, how might someone reach out to you if they wanted to connect with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, Murray Harber. There's not another Murray Harber out there like
Okay. All right.
on
We'll link it up in the
and
show
they
notes.
can
Yeah.
find me on LinkedIn there, and they can reach out to me that way.
Nice, nice. Well, thank you so much again, Marie.
Oh,
And that
thank
brings
you.
us, yeah, you're welcome. That brings us to another end of our episode of Executive Wellness Unplugged. And thanks, as always, for tuning in and supporting our new podcast. And be sure to look for upcoming episodes of Executive Wellness Unplugged via our podcast page on our website, workplacewellnesscoe.com, or wherever you listen or watch your favorite shows. So thanks again, Murray, and stay healthy, everyone. And as I like to say, keep on keeping it real and be kind to yourself. Bye for now.